But generally speaking, unfortunately, we have these boxes in front of us and we put our entire lives and our entire business on them, and we just assume that they're going to continue to work, and sometimes they don't. And this is bad in that it's much more global than the ransomware attacks, but it's also good in that ransomware attacks are much, much harder to recover from this. I've done so many of these, and we're talking about hours and hours per device, not 15 minutes per device recovery time.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of TechInformed's podcast series TI Talks. And this week I am joined by TechInformed's esteemed deputy editor, Anne-Marie Corvin. Welcome to the podcast, Anne-Marie.
Great to be here, Ricki.
Now, many of you may have heard and possibly even experienced firsthand how a simple system update in fact shut down the whole system. So that's right, we're discussing the CrowdStrike Microsoft IT outage that affected systems running on Windows all across the world. 8.5 million to be more precise. And we'll be joined later by Danny Jenkins, the CEO and founder of ThreatLocker, who is going to give us a little bit more detail about the whole situation. But first, Anne-Marie, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what exactly happened?
Right, yes. Friday's global IT outage caused planes to ground, forced TV stations off air, including CBeebies. It disrupted payments, cancelled hospital appointments. Microsoft's blue screen of death could even be seen on ad billboards in Times Square. Now, the error was blamed on a faulty update in cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike's endpoint security tool called Falcon. The glitch caused any Windows computers that Falcon is installed on to crash without fully loading. Microsoft has revealed that the outages affected, as you said, about 8.5 million devices, but that's only 1.1% of their share of devices, Windows computers worldwide. CrowdStrike issued a fix, followed somewhat later by an apology from the CEO, and yet for some there was no quick fix, as companies have reported having to work through every single one of their devices manually to be able to reboot in safe mode. This isn't just like a patch that takes 5 minutes. You know, this is going to take some organizations days, possibly weeks to recover from.
So it's literally just a case of one by one, all right, who's next? Laptop, reboot, safe mode, one by one, going through all of them.
Yeah, I mean, there will be a priority. So hospitals, critical infrastructure, airports, the really important machines will be up and running first. If you don't need to work for 2 days and, infrastructure is not dependent on it, there might be that kind of priority. But there are people still out there constantly rebooting and looking at a very sad blue screen.
It is very sad. It has a little sad face on it, if I remember correctly. It's like a colon and a bracket.
It does. The blue screen of death, as it's known.
It's not dramatically named at all.
No, not at all.
Actually, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I had actually had some friends I mentioned to you before that literally were given the day off work on Friday because their whole systems had just gone down and nobody could do anything. So they just got the day off. So it's not a sad story.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair to the cyber firms, and maybe we'll come on to this, I think the whole community's really pulled together, and some firms, as well, like Danny will talk about, they've been volunteering their services in the community, and because of the manual aspect of this, you have to have a keyboard to be able to reboot these machines. It really helps to have someone who knows what they're doing, and if you're a remote worker or your IT department's remote, that's an extra headache. So I think a lot of cyber firms have been sort of volunteering to sort of go out there and help companies. But yeah, there's still a lot of trust, I think, that is going to, need to be won back. As Elon Musk put on Twitter, it turns out the virus was the antivirus, and it's hugely embarrassing for the cybersecurity community that, something that was designed to protect networks has, with one faulty update, wiped loads of them out.
And so my mum was right all along when she says that she doesn't want to update her phone. She can't be asked to do all the updates all the time. She might have had some extra knowledge there that we didn't know about. So Anne-Marie, can you maybe explain a little bit more about why it happened?
A big issue that's come up here is endpoint security tools, because they are security tools that are lodged deep within the kernel of a device and they need administration privileges. So it's like wedged deep within the device. So if that goes wrong, it shuts down, and that's why you have to manually reboot. Microsoft is blaming the EU for this, actually. The European Commission did an antitrust investigation about 12 years ago, and one of the things that Microsoft agreed to do was to let third-party security firms into that part of the operating system. It couldn't just offer its own cybersecurity software defender. It had to let other people kind of offer theirs. Hence, that's why CrowdStrike has that level of access privileges. Now, Macs weren't affected, and one of the reasons is about 4 years ago, they announced that they weren't going to let any third-party software developers that deep into the system. Hence, you've got happy Macs, but blue screens of death.
So why, if it was the EU thing, is it only Microsoft that had to do that? Why didn't Apple have to do that as well? Do you know?
Because at the time, I think that's a good question, but I think at the time the focus was on Microsoft. It was just at that period of time, it was the big tech giant that was sort of dominating the market. I don't think in 2006 Apple had that much of a foothold. Right. It wasn't under the microscope as much in Europe.
And so do you have any other, what are the rest of your kind of takeaways from this? I'm sure you've had a lot of comment from people everywhere, but what are your kind of like some of your key takeaways?
In terms of endpoint security is going to come under the microscope now. Some people are even going to like switch off their tools, which is not advisable because especially now, like this is the time where like hackers are, treading over the debris of the outage, looking at easy targets. So don't be tempted to do that, I think is the advice. There's also been a lot of talk around blindly accepting updates. The advice seems to be that you need to test and release in batches and not blindly accept them. And also just knowing a bit more about your supply chain and knowing exactly what software you've got on your machine. I mean, this is all quite basic stuff that, cybersecurity experts have been kind of banging the drum on for a long time, but it's only when an outage like this happens that you realize the importance of it.
That seems to be like a running theme with like cybersecurity experts. Like every time anything happens, they're like, well, we've been telling you this for a long time, guys, but nobody wants to listen to us. Yeah. Nobody wants to spend the money all the time to implement it.
And then the other thing that people talk about is, are too many relying on too few? So I think CrowdStrike's got 24% of the endpoint security market, which is a huge multi-billion-dollar company. And Microsoft, only 1% of devices were affected, but that 1% equals 8.5 million devices, which just goes to show what the foothold of the market is. Experts are saying that, you just shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket and maybe sort of spread your suppliers out a bit more.
Well, fortunately, Anne-Marie has written an article all about this, and you can read that if you check on TechInformed's website and get her top takeaways from the CrowdStrike IT outage. But here to join us now to tell us more about it is Danny Jenkins, the CEO and founder of ThreatLocker.
We're also going to be talking about how cyber firms can start building trust back up again and what lessons can be gained from what is being dubbed as the biggest IT outage in history. Danny, thanks for joining us in what must be a busy old time for cybersecurity. Some experts are warning that recovery from the outage could be a long and arduous process. Why is this exactly? And why is it not simply a matter of patching things up and getting back to business?
So the challenge is when you have a problem with what's called a driver, and security tools all run as drivers, is you can't boot into the operating system without physically getting hands on the PC. So if you're thinking about regular software that fails, an IT guy can remotely connect in, they can push out fixes and do things like that. When you think about a driver that fails, as soon as the computer starts, it immediately blue screens and goes into a reboot. So you've got to get hands on the keyboard, which means if you've got lots of computers in one place and you've got a lot of IT people, it's not too bad. Remote users, scattered users, remote offices, all of this makes things difficult.
What can firms do to sort of mediate this?
So I think the most important thing is from the IT team focusing on the critical systems. So what we expect is probably 80% of machines are going to be back online, if not already within a day or two more, because most machines can get to in a reasonable amount of time. So servers, critical systems, hospital systems, your key business systems, get them on time. I think as a user, people need to expect, what do I do for the business? Can I take 2 days away from my computer without ending the business? If they can, they're probably going to wait longer. The other thing, making sure you get as many IT hands on the keyboard as possible. So getting technical support from external resources. We've done some stuff in our community where we've offered it to hospitals where we can send our teams out to just get hands on the keyboard. And unfortunately, the big risk is getting users to self-remediate, which means giving users administrative passwords, which is also going to have a security implication later on.
Is that something you've had to do? Or
so we don't use CrowdStrike because we use our own security tool. So thankfully we weren't affected, but we have seen businesses that have given users local passwords. So they've called the user up and said, okay, I'm going to get you to restart your machine. They've walked them through the process of recovering, and they've said, okay, I'm going to boot into safe mode, enter this code in, and the BitLocker recovery key is causing a whole bunch of problems as well to make things worse. They boot into safe mode, they enter the administrator password, and then they delete the files and reboot. But now your users have the administrator password to do whatever they want on their machine, including disable security software or do anything else.
Run that through me again about BitLocker. Why is that causing things to slow down?
So what BitLocker does is it allows you to encrypt your hard drives on your laptops. Really, really important. It means if your laptops get stolen, no one can get into your laptop. And when you log in, you put your password, it decrypts. When you restart your computer into safe mode, BitLocker has to be disabled. And in order to disable it, you have to enter a recovery key. Now, this is a real pain because if an IT guy, it's a big, long character key that you have to type in exactly right. And if you get one character wrong, restart. The other problem is every computer will have a different recovery key. So rather than going around in an office environment with 10 computers, throwing the same password in over and over and over again, you now have to go and get the key that matches that computer and type it in to the keyboard.
So there are a lot of people thinking, where's the key? Do I still have the key?
It's an issue. In most businesses, they tend to have them centrally located in Azure or something, but there are companies that won't have the key, and that makes things more complicated. CrowdStrike have apparently published a new article where you can opt in to have CrowdStrike disable CrowdStrike completely remotely. This will allow you to get your machines back up without having that key, but that's also painful as well because it means you're now turning off your security. And we're in a state of heightened security right now. The world has had more cyber attacks in the last 12 months. Turning off security products, it sometimes is necessary, and it is necessary in many cases here, but it's also a bad thing.
Do you think a lot of people will end up turning off their EDRs, their endpoint security tools after an incident like this?
I don't think so, but I am concerned about the impact on getting funding for future endpoint security tools because obviously boards, finance directors never want to spend money, and security threats are up higher than ever. And while this week's events have been catastrophic, we're talking about single digits of percentage of computers that have been taken down. If we compare that to ransomware attacks that happened over 5 years or 10 years, there's far more endpoints taken down by ransomware attacks. But I am concerned that it's going to be harder to get approval. We're answering a lot more questions for our customers to say, what do we do to make sure this won't happen? We're not pushing 10 updates a day because we're chasing threats so fast. That's important, and it's going to have to be really well articulated to the businesses. And then honestly, vendors, we have to step up. We have to make sure we don't destroy people's machines.
I mean, there is a trust issue that needs to be dealt with now, isn't there? With the software designed to protect networks, there's the potential with one faulty update to wipe it out. What do you think the cybersecurity community can do to kind of sort of restore trust again?
And this isn't new because a lot of tools are actually tools that are designed to protect us also have the ability to take down our businesses. And we see this all the time. In 2021, there was a Kaseya vulnerability that allowed thousands of businesses to get hit by ransomware on what was supposed to be a tool to remove security vulnerabilities from the machine, and ended up being a backdoor into the machine. SolarWinds in 2019 to 2020, the same scenario. We've seen these tools used over and over again, and we see that companies are getting better and stricter. one of the things that we actually advocate for is making sure you understand the tools that you use and also limit them. Because when you run software on your computer, whether it's security software or whether it's just regular software, the software actually has access to your full machine, all of your data, and can cause these problems. So we advocate and we help customers limit the amount that the tools that they run on their machine can actually do on their machine to avoid issues like this.
Yeah. I mean, how much, if you're sort of lead on an IT team, you have to do an inventory of your own tools. Do you also need to do an inventory of your suppliers' tools as well? I mean, how far does it go in terms of the supply chain?
So one of the things, yes, and the challenge is you probably have about 200 or 300 tools running on your software running across your organization, and we see this quite often where we deploy ThreatLocker to a client and then we show them a report of all the tools and all the software they've got. And we did one for an elections commission recently, and they had Russian software, multiple Russian applications running in their environment that they just didn't know about. And then they obviously start panicking and responding, and these tools have access to all their data. So you do have to know what's there. And then the problem is what you're supposed to do, unfortunately, hasn't saved us, which is get a SOC 2 Type 2, get an ISO audit of the client, get the information, read the report, make sure they have good processes and procedures in place. Unfortunately, in all of these examples, CrowdStrike, SolarWinds, all of them had those good processes and procedures. And when you read their reports, they would come out squeaky clean. Mm-hmm. So yes, we should know what they're doing, but it hasn't really helped us. It's kind of like, oh, we know, but things still go wrong. At the end of the day, it's still technology. There still wasn't enough processes, and it caused a disaster for many companies.
In terms of people that are still staring at a blue screen of death, do you have any advice for them?
I would say buy your IT guy donuts and you might get fixed quicker. and the IT crowds right now, they're struggling. They're underwater. And I've worked a lot of ransomware recoveries, and it's when you're in a single business, it's a similar scenario. Every device is offline. They're going to be tired. They're going to be working, and there's a lot of IT people worked long hours this weekend. And I would say be patient, help where you can, and go easy on the IT department, because it's not their fault that your computer crashed.
We sometimes forget the human element of it, don't we? I think the donuts is a good advice.
Yes, and a little bit of bribery as well with donuts might get your computer fixed closer than the guy next to you.
I mean, in terms of like lessons learned, what can we learn from this outage?
I think, generally speaking, and this is a problem generally across business, is when you introduce something new into your environment, you should test it on a smaller group of devices, and then you should roll it out. In the case of CrowdStrike, it was a little bit more terrifying, because even the businesses that had those processes, CrowdStrike's pushing 10 updates a day sometimes, and they're automatically getting them without any testing. I think we should be looking at security tools that don't require 10 updates a day to be functional. Because the problem is when you're looking for threats, they're constantly replying, they're constantly fighting to get ahead of the threat. So they have to push those updates, and it's right to get those updates. But if you change the way that you think about security, say, well, what if we actually just lock down our systems better in the first place, so we don't have to look for every threat, so we're not scared of every threat. We just have better authentication. We have things like application alert listing, because that's really important when it comes to hardening your environment. And then you don't need security tools that need 10 updates a day. And then when you do have software, and most companies don't do this in fairness, you should be staging those releases. I think what we've learned on the servers is sometimes less is more when it comes to servers, especially something that's auto-updating, because these servers that are operating airports and hospitals, they cannot afford to go down. And this is not a good scenario.
Great. I think that covered all my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add about what's happened over the past couple of days?
No, I think it's been a tough time. We're seeing more and more issues come as a result. There's more and more people still struggling. The big thing we're seeing is it's harder than people expected to get these machines back up and running. And as a software vendor, we have really, really good processes, but we're even scrambling and making sure that we've missed nothing in our processes, and everyone's double checking that we won't be the next CrowdStrike to do this.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
But generally speaking, unfortunately, we have these boxes in front of us, and we put our entire lives and our entire business on them, and we just assume that they're going to continue to work, and sometimes they don't. And normally these conversations are about a ransomware attack. And in one aspect, this is bad in that it's much more global than the ransomware attacks. But it's also good in that ransomware attacks are much, much harder to recover from this. I've done so many of these, and we're talking about hours and hours per device, not 15 minutes per device recovery time.
Okay, so it's not as bad as if a hacker got into your machine.
Oh, if you have a ransomware attack, and unfortunately thousands of small businesses, thousands of large organizations have this, it happens to them every year, that is much, much worse, because now you're talking about a scenario where it's hours per device, your data's out on the internet. I've seen businesses completely fail over that. So while this is a pain, it's not as bad as the alternative, which is if we don't run security tools, we're going to be underwater and we won't be able to recover from that because our data will be leaked, our systems will be down for days. And once an attacker's got control of your system, it's very, very hard to get them off it.
That's a good way of looking at it. Do you think this will be like one of the talking points at Black Hat next month?
I think this is going to be the talking point and the butt of memes on Facebook for the next 3 years. And definitely at Black Hat.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be all about AI, but there you go. Something's managed to eclipse it. Although I have read stuff about people saying that, if AI was involved in a supercharged outage like this, it would be worse.
Unfortunately, and that's one of the risks about embedding AI into technology that can shut down your business. It can make crazy decisions. It's making decisions on external data. So a lot of businesses have to be really careful about where they use it and what its limitations are and it can do in your business. And we're seeing the biggest fear of AI right now is the ability to distribute new and unique malware, undetectable malware at rapid speeds. If it was an AI attack, and it would be worse. I feel for the CrowdStrike staff at Black Hat next month. I wouldn't want to be standing at their booth in a red shirt.
Thanks for taking the time out what must be a really busy time in your schedule to talk to us today, Danny.
You're welcome. And if you need anything else, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks so much for offering us your insight, Danny. We really appreciate your time. Anne-Marie, how do you feel like that went?
Yeah, there's quite a lot to unpack there, but I think Danny makes a really important point about the human element of it. A lot of guys and girls are working around the clock to kind of sort all this out, and so the importance of donuts can't be underestimated.
And thankfully, none of our laptops shut down during the podcast. So thank you everyone for listening to this episode of TI Talks. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for joining me as the co-host today. And we will see you all again soon. Until then, stay informed.